Okay.
I think my phone's over there somewhere.
Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
Good evening and welcome to.
Wake up!
Oh, that's right.
Wake up!
I guess I should. I guess I should. You know, tonight it's going to be kind of an all over the page, maybe, conversation. Because I really would like us to talk about the emotional, psychological health of our country as if it was a person, and our spiritual health as a country as if it was a person. And at the end, I'm going to ask you to grade how well we're doing as a country. You're the teacher, and America is your student. Okay? But what brought all this upon us at this time partially was the death of Charlie Kirk. And I think it was the absolute icing on the cake. And it surprised me in many ways, too. First of all, I've been following the guy for more than 2 years and didn't know he was world involved. I mean, people in Israel loved him. The Iranians hated him and called him by name and other names, you know, and just phenomenal outreach. And what got my attention was the response to his death from both sides of the aisle, and it's hitting me how polarized, in my opinion. Okay, you're the brains, and you know you're the profession. I'm here for looks. Okay, but the thing is, how much more has this polarized us, and can we really live like this? So, I'm going to ask you both for your opinion. Okay, I'm assuming you might agree with me. Are we polarized, David?
Me first, huh? I don't think that there's any question that we are highly polarized. The one thing I might take issue with is the implicit assumption that often occurs in that question that there was some time in American history where we were united and we were all on the same page and moving forward in the same way. American history has been defined by societal and by political struggle. Although I do think that there are some things about the current state of our polarization and political struggle that are new that I suppose we can get into a bit later.
All right. Mr. LaShare.
Pretty much, I agree that there is a strong division in this country among various groups. Although, I do see a modicum of unification. And where that comes in is, number one, the passion that I see on, I'll say both sides, is based on strong beliefs, whatever those are, strong beliefs. I also see the commonality in that everybody has some personal experience with whatever the issue is. We've all lost loved ones, we've all experienced crime, so on and so forth. So in that sense, although there are strong divisions, there's just a very small area where there is somewhat of an overlap.
I think the last time I saw us almost unified was the 9/11 event. And how long did that last? 6 months. Unfortunately, moments of unification come and go,
Yeah.
like a marriage. And 60% of those break up in divorce. only to get married again, and 30% of those will break up and divorce and get married again, and nobody wants to live with you because they know the history.
Yep.
But I'm concerned that I'm seeing, in my opinion, some real fracturing, and I'm wondering if it can be healed. And I believe the Charlie Kirk assassination event might have been the tipping point. And because I've seen the horrible things some extreme leftists had said, and I've seen some horrible things the extreme right has said. You know, and so I don't know if it could be repaired. But I'm asking for your opinion on, is this a momentary thing, or do you think this is an ongoing, increasing disaster that we're waiting on?
Well, I would, did you want to go first?
Go ahead, Leisha.
I would suggest that that would be another dimension where there is some commonality, that is the extreme amount of emotion that is involved with not only the Charlie Kirk murder, this horrific act, but along a lot of lines. There is strong emotion. So ultimately, in my mind as a psychologist, I would suggest that really the issue is much larger than emotion. For me, the issues have to do with attitudes and beliefs.
Foundational?
Those being foundational? Yes, very much so. Attitudes being defined as viewing things as positive, either people or events, viewing them as either positive or negative. Beliefs being those things, people and situations that people see as true or not true. Such as in the Charlie Kirk murder. I happen to believe this was a very false, negative thing to do. Others don't share that. That's a problem.
Well, define that, false negative.
Well,
which normally would mean a positive.
well, I meant, I tried to subscribe to both ideas that in terms of my attitude was a very negative event. My belief is that I cannot characterize this in any way as something that is true. It is a negative thing.
David?
I think I could probably speak for hours on this particular topic, the topic of where this polarization comes from, what its source is, and how you fix it. And so in the interest of time, I will try to restrain my tendency to elaborate. One thing that will give some clarity to what I have to say here. You know, Rebbe, you mentioned some very bad statements on the left and some very bad statements on the far left and on the far right. In my experience, the statements that we tend to see on the far right are very, very, very similar to the ones that the far left have been making for quite some time. For example, now that Mr. Kirk has been assassinated, you have now the sort of the alt-right style of pundit, the Candace Owens and the Tucker Carlsons and their ilk, sort of coming out of the woodwork to say, well, Charlie, we all think of him as if he was an Israel supporter, but actually he wasn't. And I have super secret information that says that actually he was very opposed to Israel's war of aggression against the Palestinians in Gaza, which, when you look at what the left is saying, the left has been saying the exact same thing for quite some time. I also need to identify that with respect to his assassination in particular, we saw widespread jubilation and celebration on the left in the way that we have never seen for a political assassination before. So
especially for a non-politician.
especially if right, let's say it's a political slash ideological assassination of someone who is not a politician. It's political because the personal is political, right? It's a Linskyite. You pick the target, you personalize it, you polarize it, and you make it personal about that person. And so everything is political. We can't talk about this topic without getting political because everything is political. So that said, we've never seen jubilation like that. For the assassination of a politician, and maybe that's just social media revealing the demons in people's hearts. Maybe there's this phenomenon whereby people who are deeply online and they talk to the entire world as if they were alone in their kitchen. And whereas before you might have had people celebrating because this person that they didn't know and they'd never heard anything that he said, but they'd heard that he's a bad guy. Before you might have had people celebrating because he was dead in the privacy of their own homes. But now they're filming that celebration on TikTok. And as we're also seeing, and this is relevant to the conversation as well, there's been a backlash against that for the first time, which is a very interesting socio-political discussion to have in and of itself. But really,
I hope that's part of our discussion tonight.
I hope so. I'd like that. Now you mentioned, is there a way back? So that you know from the outset where I'm coming from. I believe that there's a great deal of Gramscian damage in our society, that it was deliberate, that it comes out of the Frankfurt School of the 1930s, and that it particularly was able to infiltrate this country, not merely through the communist infiltration of the country in the 50s. And for those of you who are not aware, Joseph McCarthy was right. All the things that Joseph McCarthy said were absolutely 100% correct.
It came true.
And well, yes, and they came true. But for example, the accusations that he made, they weren't false. You know, you might not agree with shutting communists out of positions of power. That's a different discussion. I'm going to take it for granted that it's a good thing not to have communists in power. But you can't say that McCarthy was wrong. What we saw was that when we went to a full-on, quote-unquote, civil service in the government, and we created the Department of Education, what we ended up doing was creating a way for a very hostile anti-American mindset to infiltrate it into the minds of our children. And that's a terrible thing, especially because this mindset is generally shared by people who typically do not reproduce, which means that in order to maintain those particular thought memes and thought forms, they need to inject them into your children. And so we've been sending our kids to schools for the past few decades, 50 years or so, where the kids have then had these anti-civilization thought memes injected into them. So if you want to fix it, at minimum, you have to eliminate the anti-American monopoly in American education. And number two, you have to maintain that elimination and reconstitute a sense of civic fortitude and duty among the new generation for probably the time period of at least one generation, say 25 years. And once you've done that, you've more or less expelled these ideas from the up-and-coming body politic. You can then return to a state of, okay, how do we discuss some of these complex phenomena? But what we found is that when we allow discussion about anything and everything, we end up having kids thinking that America is the source of the greatest amount of evil in the world. No other country in the world ever had slavery. It's all the fault of the white man. And we have to overthrow the American order and reconstitute it in a more socialist form. And these are kids who are apparently completely unaware that was tried on approximately 50% of the world in the 20th century.
It failed.
Not only did it fail, it resulted in the murder of hundreds of millions of people. So it's a complicated, very complicated answer.
I think you're right. The way you've described it, very complicated, I agree. For me, the question that remains is the why question. Mm-hmm. I mean, Why is it that certain things occur? Why is it that we have these strong displays of jubilation and so forth, as you mentioned, David? And I would, again, subscribe to a psychological perspective that says, you know, it's about attitudes and beliefs, and even more broadly than that, it's about values.
Mhm.
Values being a set of beliefs that permeates large areas of individual lives. And so obviously, there are different processes in society that have been set up so that these dysfunctional values have been learned by a whole population, half of the country maybe.
At least.
At least half of the country. Yeah. And so for me then the question becomes, how do we educate people such that we can reinstate values that are those that we brought from our history?
Now, I feel like I'm sitting between two very smart guys. But I want to kind of give my simple man perspective of what you both just said.
Give it to us, Rebbe.
Okay.
Please.
The idea is that we've lost the purpose of education and became a nation of indoctrination. And the purpose of education, as I was growing up, and I don't know if you're in our age bracket, okay, but we were doing the reading, the writing, the arithmetic, the social studies, world history, English proper, okay, and that was a predominant function of the school system. And now, if you go to the school system, you have to have grief counselors, okay, career counselors, and all these who are supposed to be educated, but they teach or serve according to their personal perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
There's no unified scope and sequence. There's my $10 term here. Scope and sequence for the common student. And what we've lost is nationalistic identity. We talked about those of World War II as the greatest.
The greatest. Yeah.
Okay? And the greatest generation. But what they have in common, not that they were all English speaking, they weren't all Hispanic, they're not all white, they're not all black, they're not all this, but they shared a common understanding. I was looking at an article today on the loss of the American dream. Who does that concept really apply to anymore? Because we have people who are promoting the redistribution of national wealth, which means you don't make enough money, but you make more than enough, you should be subsidizing this guy. It's called taxation through socialization without representation. Things like that, kind of poetic. But also the idea that we've lost our moral foundation. I was discussing with the class earlier about capital punishment. Did you know rape in the Bible, I know it's an old book, still relevant, was a capital crime, and those who committed this capital crime were dismissed from life.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't locked up, they weren't sent away or exiled, okay, because of the heinousness of their crime and the violation. They were put to death. You know, the whole thing, kind of like the Charlie Kirk thing, is there are both the state and the feds would like to see capital punishment, okay? But there are thousands and thousands who are crying out how barbaric it is. You know, we've lost our communal identity and purpose.
Well, if I may add to that, Rabbi,
Please do.
I completely agree with that, but I don't want to offend anyone, but
This is the place to be honest
Okay.
and not worry about offense.
okay. I think one of the institutions that we cannot omit from this discussion you use the word moral. However,
Spiritual.
okay, spiritual. Then obviously, then you know where I'm going with this. Is,
Obviously.
for lack of a better term, is the role of the church in society, which has lost its critical function. I agree, going all the way back to the late 1500s, early 1600s, I agree with Francis Bacon, who said that not only for the church, but for others, that false knowledge stems from three sources. He calls these idols, this false knowledge. One is the idol of the tribe. And I would maintain that what the church has done, number one, is they're following what is popular among the general society and not having a strict focus on Scripture, on what the Torah says or what the Bible says. He also mentions the idol of the cave, catering to individual wants and individual criticisms and so forth. Oh, if I say this, he'll be offended. If I don't have coffee, he's going to be unhappy, and so on and so forth. And then thirdly, Francis Bacon maintains that churches subscribe to what he calls the idol of the marketplace. That we begin to use terms and words and phrases and adopt those into our worship sessions. I mean, I'm old-fashioned. I was born in 1949. I'm 76 years old. I always wore a tie to the university. I continue to wear ties.
And it looks good.
Wow, you're kind. But for me, this is me. I don't like seeing preachers up there in shorts and t-shirts or in jeans and tank tops.
And don't forget the flip-flops.
And the flip-flops. That is the idol of the marketplace, as far as I'm concerned. And that is terrible. The church has lost its role in society. So we're becoming like the culture as opposed to the church influencing society.
I'm going to agree with you. And I tell you, I go to my bank, and I appreciate the fact that they still dress professionally. They don't look like somebody that's walked out of Walmart. Nothing wrong with Walmart if you're shopping. But, I think what I'm hearing you say is that church, synagogue, Messianics, Christians, Jews, whatever terms you want to use, we've lost our role in society by catering to it. And we've even lost our language. You work in the world of high tech. Mm-hmm. Okay, we have megabytes and bits and terabytes and thises and thatses. Just like doctors. I hate going to the doctor because I can't understand half what he's saying. But when we lost the fundamental basic family, historically, the church of the past would have stepped in and become the communal father for the community. And that doesn't happen.
No.
Now, I'm going to tell you, it did happen for me. And it was predominantly through Boy Scouts. And I was a hooligan. I really was. Okay, I remember going to my scout troop over the Ambassador Bridge into Canada, buying a bag of switchblades, a bag, and a couple rolls of cut cord, and we'd lower them down before I had to go through customs and go pick them up after we were done. Mm-hmm. Okay, but we've lost that. I had men, scoutmasters, who took me under the wing. They actually took me literally home with them and camping with them. They treated me like a son. And I haven't forgotten who I owe my image of manhood to. And I love my father, but he was none of those things. Okay?
Yeah.
And he came to faith later on, and it wound up good. But where is this kavana, a closeness, a communal identity, when the world fails us, when the school system fails us? We can't afford the church and synagogue to fail, because 3 strikes and you're out.
I think there's a lot of fear among the trendier religious institutions, the trendier denominations or non-denominations, as the case may be, that if they don't speak in the terms of the world, then they won't be able to attract anybody, right? You gotta meet them where they are. So have a big light show and a big concert with mist machines and show clips from movies to illustrate your sermon points, and don't ever really get too close to the gospel because that might scare people off. But I believe, and I could be wrong about this, anyone with the exact statistics is welcome to correct me, but my understanding is that the growth of denominational growth is best in those denominations and those groups, those institutions that have attempted to retain their more traditional forms.
In Judaism, we have conservative, reform, reconstructionist, renewalist, humanist. We have modern orthodoxy, Haredim, Hasidim.
Humanist.
Yeah. But what makes it unique is though the ultra-Orthodox and the Orthodox are always the target of the conversation, they're still held up as the standard. Where is our standard? And you're right, we've lost our vocabulary. Sanctification, justification, salvation, and no one wants to talk because it's primitive, the blood.
I'll illustrate this with an example.
And don't forget hell.
Yeah, of course.
Right,
It's a huge
right.
part of it. There's, I like to watch. I watch my fair share of Charlie Kirk videos and a variety of other sort of videos of social commentary that involve bringing people with highly opposing views together to discuss and sometimes yell at one another over things. And one thing that I noticed is that in some of these videos, with a particular kind of person, usually a young woman, an attractive young woman who calls herself a Christian, but dresses the way that the world would have her dress, let's say. You get her into a discussion about whether or not behaving in a modern way is a good thing, right? Is it a good thing to be sexually promiscuous, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? What ends up happening is that the person, and it's usually a man, who's arguing, no, these behaviors are unacceptable, you shouldn't be engaging in them for this reason, and this reason. The response is very frequently, well, you're just being so judgmental. You're being really judgmental when you do that. And it's curious to me because I can look through the Bible, but with the exception of Yeshua's statement, like, judge not lest you be judged. In other words, you have to judge according to the same standard that you're going to be judging yourself. But Yeshua was also a man who formed a cat of nine tails and drove the robbers out of the temple. Right? He wasn't non-judgmental. With the exception of that, I look in the scripture. I don't see anywhere where judgment is listed as a sin. Judgment is something we do every day, all day. But just as an example of how we've taken on, in many ways, those of us who are religious and spiritual and faithful have nonetheless taken on the ideas of the world, we've come to this state where we believe that being judgmental is a sin. No. Condemning people improperly is a sin. But judgment is required. We have to judge with righteous judgment. It's so many people have been infected by the thoughts of the world. If I may give you another example. Love is love, right? That's the rallying cry of the LGBTQ2IA plus alphabet people, right? Now, first of all, where does that principle come from, right? If we just look at the words love is love, well, we can tell if we're an alien looking at Earth. Well, this group of people obviously believes that love is very important. Well, where does that come from? That comes from Christianity, or it comes from Judaism through Christianity. The idea of a loving God does not exist in Islam, which is a pagan religion. It's a religion of the blood of your enemies, as opposed to the blood of a substitutionary sacrifice. It doesn't come from any pagan religion, right? The Greeks didn't believe in gods of love, and the Romans, of course, believing
in
basically
gods of lust.
right, but not like God is love, and you shall love the Lord your God, and love your neighbor as yourself. Those ideas all come from Christianity. So you have the alphabet people, right, who are making a statement that is straight out of Christian faith that originally goes back to Judaism. They take it as a given that love is the most important thing, but that comes as a misinterpretation of the Jewish and Christian idea, where they have taken the word love, which in the scriptures in its purest form is chesed, right? It's loving kindness. It is the absolute greatest form of love that you can have for somebody, the giving of yourself and pouring yourself out for the sake of another person for nothing in return. And they've just sort of reinterpreted that to mean, well, lust is lust, and we're just going to call lust love. But it all harkens back to the Jewish and Christian idea of love being important.
And it's the problem, in my opinion, of not reading sentences. People read verses, but they don't read sentences. If you take the idea, judge not, lest you be judged, nobody ever finishes the text. Judge not, lest you be judged, for by that judgment you shall be judged.
Right.
You know? And so if you are narcissistic and self-centered and selfish by nature, okay, I'm going to judge everyone as inferior. Okay? When God looks at me, am I inferior? You know, he looks at me with love, and he elevates. The more confident I am in who I am in him, the more my task is to elevate others. Okay. But I do have the question, can it be fixed?
May I respond to something David
Okay,
said?
please.
I agree with what you said, David. In my, again, someone with other information, please correct me. But in the original Jewish biblical Hebrew, in the original biblical Hebrew throughout the Tanakh, I don't read anywhere where the Jewish people told the Lord, I love you. It doesn't exist. I've never read that. I agree with you on that. The other thing that is interesting to me is, maybe I'll speak for myself. Why should I care what people label me? I'm comfortable with who I am. So if I'm labeled as a racist, if I'm labeled as narrow-minded, judgmental, then I say, so be it. I am, and I'm proud of it. I'm not going to enter into some senseless, meaningless argument that I'm not. I don't have to defend myself.
People will say to me, oh, you think you're holier than thou? Yeah.
It's the quickest way to disarm a rhetorical grenade.
Yeah.
And some of the people that I like to watch point this out. You know, when you're accused of being XYZ, you say, okay, yeah, maybe I am. Anyways, would you like to answer the question that I asked, regardless of what I am?
Yeah.
Is the quickest way to defuse a rhetorical grenade. Just agree with it.
Well, I've found that among individuals. It's very interesting because all you have to do is ask some follow-up questions and you find out they don't know what they're talking about. But for the lack of information and any level of intelligence, what they do is they subscribe to these ad hominem arguments. So they attack the person, qualities of the person, without proposing any meaningful, rational, cognitive explanations.
In a legitimate yeshiva, people can enter into very heated arguments. But the moment it gets personal, you're fat. Okay. The moment it slips into human traits or personality,
Yes.
you've already lost.
Yes.
Okay. Because you have no other defenses. And what you're talking about and approaching it is very much the Charlie Kirk standard. Okay. But I think there's so many things that divide us. That'd be the war in Israel, the war in Ukraine and Russia. Where's the line? Media, social media is the enemy of everyone, in my opinion. And here we are on social media. Okay,
But it's not about it. We're not giving a bunch of sound bites here.
no, we're biting a lot of sounds. Okay,
But I think, if I may, Rabbi,
oh please.
where I would give tremendous kudos, I would commend Mr. Charlie Kirk. The message he gave was he did not subscribe to fear tactics, as far as I was concerned. He provided a strong message that was logically organized, good evidence, and he stuck with the ideas. He didn't attack individual qualities, he didn't subscribe to fear, and he didn't get violent. And I think people are looking for that. That's a welcome change in view of what we see in society.
Well, his following was so large because it was dealing in facts.
Yeah.
One thing I appreciate about him, he's not perfect. I'm not wanting to, raise him up as some type of demigod, okay? But he brought the receipts to the table. I think it's a term he used in the White House. He always brought the evidence, stated the evidence, the origin of the evidence, okay, and his rebuttals. And it left most people, now I'm going to admit, I did see a few really smart college students. I saw a lot of indoctrinated people also. And since his demise, okay, apparently there's more than 3,200 requests.
32,000.
32,000.
32,000 inquiries about new TPUSA chapers.
Oh, wow.
Which
TPUSA.
Yeah, Turning Point USA.
Okay. And people can support that. Go online, find it for yourself. Okay. It was 32,000.
Yeah.
I'm just
Wow.
dumbfounded.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the statement, I believe it was Kierkegaard, who said that the tyrant's reign ends when he dies, the martyr's reign ends when he begins. And Charlie Kirk unquestionably was a martyr.
Yes.
He was also political because, not a politician, but he was political because now, again, Alinskyite tactics means that the personal is political. Everything is political. If you're going to talk about something, it's political. So for that reason, he was political, but that's because he decided to come down on a side that said, we as a culture and as a country need to be in tune with our, from his perspective and an accurate perspective, with our Christian heritage.
I wouldn't think, you mentioned Kierkegaard, I wouldn't think, I may be wrong, once again, I'm not a philosopher, but I wouldn't think that Charlie Kirk would be one that would support Kierkegaard's ideas, because Kierkegaard, as you know, was one of the fathers of existentialism. And it was
Want to find that term for people?
What's that?
Existentialism.
Oh, existentialism being focusing on the problems of the existence of man. And with the rise of existentialism, which is where I see Charlie Kirk not supporting this, we saw this increase in relativism. Morality is relative. What's good for you may not be good for me or for David. And we also saw this rise in pluralism. But what I heard from Mr. Charlie Kirk was he subscribed, like David said, to a strong biblical, scriptural basis for morality, for behavior. So
if I may respond to that, I think that what we find with philosophers of every sort of philosopher, including political philosophers such as Marx, Karl Marx, not Rebbe Michael Marx. If a philosopher's core, if the foundational principles on which the philosopher is operating are incorrect, You can tell right off the bat and just discard it. Dangerous philosophy arises when people observe phenomena that everyone can agree are real, and then they veer off into left field and draw conclusions out of that are wild and crazy. I think that, existentialism notwithstanding, I think that the statement that the reign of the martyr begins when he dies, as opposed to the tyrant, I think that's fairly evident. And then you can draw improper conclusions from that and improper ways to go about it. But let's observe together, for example, that there is something terribly wrong with American healthcare. That American healthcare gets people wrapped up in these messy structures that they can't get out of, or they can't actually get the care that they need, or insurance is misinterpreted as health care, whatever. We can observe that. We can say, yeah, there's actually some truth to that. And there are numerous ways that you can go about then trying to resolve that issue. You could go for example, RFK Jr. way of saying, all right, what were the political events that incentivize the healthcare industry to become this way, and are we able to roll some of those things back? And he may or may not be right about those conclusions, but that's one route that you can take. Or you can go the Luigi Mangione way and gun down healthcare CEOs in the street because that guy's the problem, right? You can start with an observation of something that may be more or less agreed upon and come to wildly varying conclusions about what it means for the application. So again, with Kierkegaard making a statement by saying that the reign of the tyrant begins, or it ends when he dies, whereas the reign of the martyr begins when he dies. By saying that, I don't think that I'm saying anything in favor of the sort of existentialistic nihilism that Kierkegaard ended up leading to.
Now I have a problem, not with what you're saying, gentlemen, but once again, I try to think a little simple. Okay, what I see is that government and idealism and philosophy, they all have the same foundation as evolution. The moment you disprove it, it just evolves into something else. Then evolves into something else. Rather than just simply saying, it was wrong, let's stop. It just keeps evolving.
Well, that's long been the joke about communism and Marxism, largely on the internet. People of my generation, every time communism fails and kills another 10 million people, well, that wasn't real communism. Let's try it over here now. Same thing, right? Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, that's the scientific method. The scientific method, it's properly supposed to be either you're wrong or you need more data, right? You're supposed to keep testing and testing and testing and testing until you've proven yourself wrong. That's how it's supposed to work. But we've sort of gotten in this corrupted, backwards way of interpreting it, where either you do a test and it kind of shows that you're right, so you're right, or wait, we need more data.
Yeah. I was just talking about that. That's a whole nother program, the scientific method, because I chuckle all the time, the use of that word science, follow the science, and this good science. None of it makes any sense, since the mere definition of science is rather complicated, and the whole thing is probabilistic. People that say, especially like on television, they're trying to promote some program or some biased idea. Well, it's been proven that scientists don't use that word proven. No. Nothing is ever proven. There may be some evidence, but it's all probabilistic. It goes on into eternity.
Yeah. So how do we get people to become scientists?
Scientists?
Real scientists. Examining the facts and the figures and the numbers, then asking why or why not.
Well, science, that's a tough. Science is defined as it's a series of issues that involve attitudes. I'm not going to go into all of these. Certain attitudes, certain assumptions, certain goals, certain procedures. So you can see, Rabbi, it gets, and then all of this is for asking and answering questions about nature or about the universe. So it's not that straightforward like these people on television try to make it out to be. They're peddling their supplements and so forth, and I see in the very, very tiny print at the bottom of the screen, based on a study, one study, might be full of error, based on a study, or another word they use is clinically based study. What in the world does that mean?
I think you're asking the right question there, Rebbe, to fix a lot of issues, not because science can answer questions of the soul or social questions, but because I'm going to, in some sense, take the balancing side of what the way that Leah Sher was talking about science there. I think that science is very, very simple. Science is, can I prove myself wrong? I have an idea. What do I need to do in order to genuinely try to prove myself wrong? This is sort of like the phenomenon that's called steel manning in logic, which is the opposite of a straw man. A straw man is your opponent says something, like, for example, Charlie Kirk points to some specific women who stated that they only had their position because of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. In other words, giving the position to someone on the basis of skin color and their
nationality or whatever.
Well, I mean, these are
Gender.
Americans. Their gender, let's say, rather than based on their merit. Charlie Kirk points to them and says they couldn't earn it on their own. They had to take the position from a white person, and they said so. But then his position strawmanned. Oh, he says that black women only have their positions because they steal them from white men, which of course he didn't say, right? It's not the position that he took. Steel manning is the opposite of that. Steel manning is, I want to hear what you're saying and try to interpret, if you're arguing against me, I want to hear what you're saying, and I want to try to interpret it in the way that is most positive and reasonable for you, and most reasonably contrary to what I'm saying. How can I properly represent your argument in the strongest form possible, and can I apply that against my argument, and does my argument still stand up? And if people did that across the board, and I'm speaking pie in the sky here, right? We can't do this. We can only do this very deliberately in certain circumstances when we try really hard, because everybody acts according to heuristics, and because heuristics allow us to shortcut the thinking process. But when we really try, this person says X, Y, Z about my argument. I'm going to interpret that in the best way possible for that person and then see if it still holds up. And people who did that with Charlie Kirk, and you see some of them, who come up, they'll ask him questions, they'll oppose his position, and he'll respond to them. And I mean, a lot of them will, yell at him or whatever, walk away. But some of them will say, okay, yeah, I can see that, right? They're steel manning his position against their own, and then they're seeing that their positions come up short. But you were asking the question, how do we fix it, right? How do we fix this, whatever this state is that we've gotten ourselves into it as a country? And my response to that is, anything can be fixed, but what price are you willing to pay in order to fix it? For example, as I've expressed, I'm of the opinion that the current state of our country, the current state in particular of our youth, is due effectively to a hostile takeover of the American educational system by people who are hostile to American values, largely because they were influenced by communist ideas, or because the schools that they subscribe to now, you go several steps back and you see that the communists were involved in founding those schools of philosophy. And those are the people teaching our children, and so those are the ideas that our children grow up with, right? So assuming that I'm right about that, just for the sake of argument, you might disagree with me, but
Humor me.
humor
Right.
me for a moment. Assuming that I'm right, what are the implications of this? We ask questions like, where did that come from, right? Why did we allow it to happen? That allows us to say things like, well, if kids were being taught in small groups at home and overseen by their parents, rather than being sent off to government education systems, this wouldn't have happened. So clearly, taking women out of the homes and putting them in the workforce had a huge influence on this. And if we want to claw some of this back, one of the steps that we have to take is find a way to drag women back into the home out of the workforce. And of course, say that is political suicide, right? That is radioactive because, I'm supposed to have my fulfillment by my career, right? Which is one of these things a lot of these women are taught, and they don't realize until their 30s or their 40s, when they don't have families, that was a lie that was designed to keep them from having families. So that's one thing that we ask. The second thing that we might ask is how do we fix the generations that have already been raised to know nothing but to be activists? What do you do with that? Right? An entire generation of people who can't do things, but who are activists against America. And they're right here in America. What do you do with that? Anything can be fixed, but how far are you willing to go to fix it? That's the question.
How much you willing to personally pay?
I think there's some really interesting research in social psychology that deals with this question as well. And fundamentally, they suggest, social researchers suggest three things to try to bring people more together. Was that your question, Rabbi?
Kinda.
Okay. Well, let me,
Fulfill your thought.
okay. One is that one of the functions of stereotypes, for example, is that people don't have to do the hard brain work. They can just go on with their agenda and not have to face information that is inconsistent with their already preformed thoughts. Mm-hmm. So one suggestion from social psychologists is if people would take the time to learn about someone or some group, like Jews or Mr. Charlie Kirk or Christians, if you would take the time to learn about them more factually, that would begin to mend the rift between two groups of individuals. Second would be more interaction.
Absolutely.
More interaction, face-to-face, close interaction. If I were to take a black guy out to coffee, if I were to go out to coffee with a Jew, maybe I would have to pay, I don't know. That's a joke. And then
It's a good one.
and then the third one is, and for me there are three tent poles for the way I think about the world. Science, philosophy, and then the third is the theological or scriptural. Believe it or not, there is research, social psychological research that shows that if we treat people nicely, we start to like them more. Mm-hmm. I think that's very interesting. Mm-hmm. And the Bible talks about that.
But I'm only going to agree with you. But I'm going to agree with part 2 first.
Okay.
The interaction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can always say those people, them, they, because you
Yeah.
don't know any. The interaction is everything. And I was reading the work of one fairly modern theologian who was talking about why the church fails.
Mm-hmm.
And it boiled down to is it practicing, is preaching. Okay, we talk about witnessing and sharing, but what about adopting and bringing people in? You know, in a small congregation, everybody will be your aunt, your uncle, your brother, your cousin, something. And without that connection, all we are philosophers of the Bible. You know, the real idea is that if you don't like people, go home. If you like people, show up. Because enough people who don't like people show up, you drive people off. And they can go back and say, I gave it a shot, and I was dismissed. There's a real reality of a lack of loving kindness. That's it. And application. And another particular older theologian I got talked about you can preach, but people will be drawn by the power. And I believe that definition of power might be as simple as living it out. Okay, you got a flat tire? Let me fix it for you. Okay, you want some coffee? Let's go. And actually, those them-day type of conversations are horribly destructive. Let me give you an example. Hopeless. Everyone gets this image, unshaved, unkempt, thief, living out of a garbage can, stealing in the middle of the night. No. I have a friend who's homeless. And I met him because I found him here early one morning at 6:30 in the morning, raking up our leaves. No one asked him to do it. He brought his own rake. And through acts of kindness by ourselves and also by the church that meets here, this person now attends. He's still homeless. But at least he gets squares every now and then, and people aren't afraid to sit down and talk to him. Okay? That's love in action. That's the real deal. And I think this is my opinion. I can't change the whole world, but I can change my corner of it. By being the person I'm supposed to be. There's a scripture we're looking at this morning, and it comes out of 1 Corinthians. It was in chapter 3. It says, "You're acting like mere men." Well, what else am I? No. As a believer, I'm the representative of the Most High God. I'm a co-heir and co-worker with Yeshua himself. I cannot live as a commoner, a mundane. You know? I have to live better than that. I'm not rich. You know? One more comment on rich. Charlie Kirk was speaking at an economic forum, and they asked him straight out, "What's wealth?" He said, "A wife and 2 kids."
Mm-hmm.
They thought he didn't understand the question. The problem was they didn't understand the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Wealth is always measured in big dollars. You know, it's always measured in status. It might be measured best in contentment. And Paul says he wanted to be content no matter what his state was. Okay? And it's a big deal that we should define wealth as something other than just dollars. Okay. Anyway, we're going to go on for a few more moments. Gentlemen, would you mind grading, and I'm pretty sure I understand, okay, the answers are to come, but the share, as an educated man, as a professor, okay, psychologist, okay, mental health-wise, what's the state of the country?
There are large numbers of people that are confused. They're lonely. They're directionless. And a lot of that I attribute to our leadership, not the current leadership, previous leadership, and the failure of the church. So with that said, I'm going to give the grade of fail for the status in this country.
Now, you mentioned the church as part of the role, and based on your understanding, your opinion, grade the church, the universal church, the synagogue, the religious.
Well, based on what I see, Rabbi, in the church, as I mentioned earlier, based on the theorizing or the philosophizing of Francis Bacon, The church has become so influenced by the culture, as opposed to making every effort to educating the people and going out and impacting the culture. I would also give the church nowadays a fail.
You're Generation X, aren't you?
No, I'm a millennial.
You're millennial.
Yeah, I'm a relatively early millennial,
Okay.
but
And you're a well-educated individual, several languages, bunches of schools, okay?
well enough.
Well enough. As well as being an author and other things. And newly married.
Yes, that is true.
Okay. By the way, I think you were smart. You chose well.
I think I did too.
She might be questionable.
I'll say,
Yeah, so just so you know, she told me I really hate it when Rebbe says that.
So it's what?
Says that you doubt her taste because she chose me. Which tells me she's a keeper.
Okay. All right. Now move right along.
Yep. Let's just slide right past that one.
Let's talk about what grade you'd give the psychological, emotional health of the country.
It's
From your opinion.
It's very hard to grade a country because a country, I believe, I agree with Nassim Taleb pre-2020 before he went insane. I agree with Nassim Taleb's observation that that the sum of parts is not the same as the whole. A country does not behave the same way as a person does, and so it's very hard to grade a country as a whole. So, understanding that I'm performing an impossible job here, have I performed enough caveats? Have I given enough caveats? I think we see statistically that particularly among young women, we have more mental health, and especially left-wing young women, more mental health problems than have ever existed in human history. I think it's something like 60% of left-wing young women are on psychotropic medications, maybe 40% of young women total. And all of this, of course, can be I shouldn't say all of it can be attributed to, but much of it could probably be attributed to social media and these new technologies that we're using that the human brain was never designed to be able to work with. Seeing the way that we have this extreme bifurcation in the country between people who believe in celebrating a man's death, a man's murder, because he disagreed with them on the one hand, and people who still see that as being a horrible thing to do, even if they disagreed with it, on the other hand. I don't think that there's any question to me that it's a hard F, that it's a hard fail. The reason that it's interesting is that unlike in a single human, I think that you have sort of two halves of the country, one of which is largely sane and trying very hard to retain its sanity, and the other one of which is living in a completely different reality and bubbled in. And that doesn't necessarily really happen with individuals. Obviously, I'm not a psychologist nor a psychiatrist, so I'm not going to make any commentary about schizophrenic individuals. But there you go. We are certainly on a sort of precipice right now. We've seen major events that feel like tipping points, but it seems to me that they're going to tip different sides of the country in completely different directions towards sanity and a return to foundational religion on the one hand, and towards this sort of nihilistic murder mindset on the other.
So
that's a firm F, because you can't have a country where, I mean, never mind 50%. Can't have a country where 2% of the country are firm believers in murder because you disagree with me. You can't have that. The entire country is destroyed if 2% of the country is like that.
Now, I know you've had some Christian contacts. You have a strong Jewish relationship. Okay, here at the synagogue. Okay. How would you grade the religious community of the U.S.?
It's pretty much the same answer. You have relatively Orthodox Christian groups, in particular, that have been trying to retain their their beliefs and their character, and then you have the Christian groups that are trying to appeal to everybody, in which case they appeal to nobody, and they become the culture instead, because that's what we have to do in order to attract people, lowest common denominator, right? So in the same way, you have that sort of bifurcation. So that's probably a pretty strong F as well. And I mean, I can see it for numerous reasons that I'm not going to go into, because I don't want to drop even more grenades into this, especially at the end of the call. But I think just as much, I feel this need to comment as well on the Jewish tradition. The Jewish tradition has long been, I'm just going to stay over here and try to do my own thing. And when terrible things are done to me, I'm just kind of going to take it, and at most I'll run away. And I haven't seen that work in Jewish history either. I think that Jews have largely been passive, and we see a lot of that as well in the Jewish tendencies of voting, right? And only recently are Jews beginning to wake up and realize that the party that they've been voting for decades and decades and decades wants them driven into the sea. That I admit, it's a little bit different for me, because my grandfather, Michael Bernstein of blessed memory, was Goldwater's counsel. He was in the he was counsel for the House Labor Committee. He wasn't a representative himself, but he was counsel for Goldwater. And so in my family, we have a long history of opposing the progressive experiment. But within the Jewish community, it's just sort of been sans souci, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, and then the evil comes upon them, and they say, well, where did this come from? So I think that's been a pretty strong F as well. You have to be able to identify, at minimum, who wants you dead.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to give you my opinion. But like both of you, they run parallel. I give the nation and religious a D+. I'm going to tell you why. Mm-hmm. Because I have faith. Okay. But I also measure everything on a bell curve. Be it be culture, society, businesses, religion, everything's on a bell curve. It's beginning and an end. And you know how the bell curve goes, and you finally hit that peak, and everything is perfect, and then people start changing it.
Yep.
I see us on the downhill slide, sliding toward a hard F. But because I'm a person of faith, okay, and I know in the bell curve, no one has ever gone back. It's never been like this, ever. Okay? But by faith, I'm hoping it can. But I'm not fooling myself either and thinking we're on an incline when we're picking up speed from gravity. And so I see all the woke stuff, I see the war stuff, I see the social media stuff, I hear the hatred and the bitterness. I see people who are anti-American in Congress openly opposing our allies, openly opposing our leaders. Okay, I don't know how many times I've heard the president referred to as a Nazi, and all the other terms. What do they expect? Okay, but by faith, as far as Kirk goes, he was a Sabbath keeper and a friend of Israel, and Israel knew it, and so did Netanyahu. Bibi, he knew it. Okay, and so did all the people he was close to.
May I comment on your comment, Rabbi?
Please.
Just a bit of a difference of opinion.
You're permitted.
I commend you for your faith. Obviously, you're a much more optimistic person than I might be. And I base that, you said the bell curve. We know that the axes never meet. So it just goes on out on both sides into infinity.
Or oblivion.
Pardon?
Or oblivion.
Yeah. Well, and in addition, my thinking comes from 2 Timothy 3:13 and Matthew 24:9 through 12, where both of them, Timothy and Yeshua, say that things are just going to get worse and worse and worse. Us people, we will be killed. We're in danger of being killed, brought before judges, imprisoned. For me, I don't see it that way as positive, Rabbi, but that's me. That's my opinion.
Well, I understand your opinion, and about 90% of the religious agree with you. Okay? And if I read the book, you're right. Okay? But between now and the end of the book, I want to hang in there as long as I can. And if you're interested in hearing a song, it's called America by Larry Norman. Not normal. Norman. Okay? And the song, well, I tell you what, it is so today, and literally, without question, on any line in the song, it's all prophetical. And it was true when he wrote it some 47 years ago. Maybe it was 50 years ago. Okay. He was the first true Jesus rocker. Okay. But anyway, I'd like to thank you guys for coming and helping me. This is a little selfish, but helping me wrestle with this conflict. Okay? And it's not going to stop.
No.
You know, I heard a couple of people talking about civil war. The only thing is, if the civil war takes place, normally people need a uniform. Because your enemy might be 2 houses down.
If something like that were to take place, where we are looking at it's the Balkans. It's the Balkans. It's not, you don't have the Mason-Dixon line separating the North and the South. You might have lines separating city from countryside in a lot of places, but I mean, nightmare. We're looking at a nightmare scenario in that case.
Yeah.
Agreed. So, not sure the topic for next week, but it'll be posted on our program called Torah Moments. Also, please remember our dear friend and brother, Rabbi Rittenhouse, who's struggling with some health issues. Okay?
All right.
So, Dave, would you like to close us in prayer?
I would be honored to.
Thank you.
Adon Olam, our Father, our King, we are grateful that we can still come together and discuss, disagree with one another, as Jews do, as the saying goes, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. We are grateful for that, and we pray that you would help us to hold on to that as long as possible. You gave not just us, but the world a great thing in America. We plead with you to open people's eyes and to make us parts of opening people's eyes, that you'd make us parts of making a difference within our wingspans, the little scope of our world that we live in every single day, to reason and to win souls for your kingdom and for a society that works and functions and that can continue to bless the world. We pray that you would be honored in that which we do, and that you would convict us when we sin. And please, especially, bless our rabbis in the coming week to their ministry and with their health issues. Be with all of us, each and every one, this synagogue, and among all of your people, Israel and the Commonwealth of Israel, including the church, in Yeshua's name.
Amen.
Amen.
Don't forget to hit the buttons. Until next time.